All right, good morning. Welcome. Thank you for joining us via Zoom this morning, and know that we appreciate your readiness and eagerness to participate in today's Indy Summer Youth Programs orientation. As Maddie mentioned, my name is Lori Satterfield, Community Benefit Program Manager for Indiana University Health. IU Health is a member of the Funding Collaborative, having been involved for the last several years. I'd like to kind of take a moment to make sure that we recognize all of our other members of the collaborative. The Lilly Endowment, made up of Jackie Dowd, Patty Villers, Taisha Hardy Sellers. The Indianapolis Foundation, a Central Indiana Community Foundation affiliate, and that's Guadalupe Pimentel Solano. The Indianapolis Foundation Library Fund, and that's Latasha Sturdivant. Allen Whitehill Clues Charitable Foundation, Inc., Jim Limler, and Elizabeth Katznell Hall. The Crystal DeHaan Foundation, Melanie Klaus. The Clues Foundation, Inc., Tracy Lane. The Nina Mason Pulliam Charitable Trust, Leanne Hoy. And the City of Indianapolis Department of Metropolitan Development, HUD, Beth Neville and Amber Hayes. In 2019, the fund awarded over $2.9 million to support programs by 169 organizations during this past 2020 summer. If you haven't noticed, we are super excited to point out that based off of community feedback and focus groups, that the fund has changed its name to the Indy Summer Youth Programs in order to generate more public engagement. This summer's activities are planned, next summer's activities are planned to help you prepare for our programs with the Marion County Youth. Let me share a brief overview of today's plans. Our first speaker will be Dr. Sean L. Huddleston, the president of Martin University. We'll take a quick break, and then we'll have our second speaker, Dr. Lori Desautels, a professor at Butler University, will speak. Then we'll have a panel kind of question and answer session. We'll take a break, and then we'll wrap things up with important updates and closing remarks. Let me leave you with this. We are all here for a reason. I believe a bit of the reason is to throw little torches out to lead people through the dark. And that's a quote by Whoopi Goldberg. At this time, I'd like to turn it back over to our MC, Maddie.
Thanks, Lori. That was awesome. We are going to go ahead and move right along, and Tracy Lane with the Clues Foundation will introduce our first speaker.
Good morning. My name is Tracy Lane, and I'm the Program Associate at the Clues Fund, one of the funders involved with the Summer Youth Program Fund. I'm excited to have the opportunity to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Sean Huddleston, who will discuss equity and inclusion in education and youth development. Dr. Huddleston currently serves as the 5th president of Martin University. His entire career in higher education has been focused on leading institutional efforts that create conditions of success for non-traditional students and those who have been historically underrepresented and underserved. Prior to joining Martin University, Dr. Huddleston served as the inaugural Vice President and Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer for the University of Indianapolis. In this role, Dr. Huddleston led system-wide efforts that enhanced institutional excellence through the design, implementation, and assessment of institutional diversity, inclusion, and equity initiatives. Dr. Huddleston's educational experiences have focused on non-traditional adult learners in higher education. As a returning adult student himself, he earned a bachelor's from Siena Heights University, a Master of Education degree in adult and higher education, and an educational specialist in leadership degree from Grand Valley University. Dr. Huddleston completed his doctorate in community college leadership at Ferris State University. Dr. Huddleston has also received professional certifications from Cornell University and Dartmouth College. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Huddleston.
Well, good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well. I think I have already passed my first Zoom test this morning because I managed to take myself off mute before I started. So that only happens every other meeting, so that's pretty good. I want to thank everyone involved in putting today's presentation and today's program together. I think you're all in for a treat in terms of all of the great information and rich information that will come from the presenters. I know some of them personally, and I can tell you that we've got some really smart people. I also want to thank Tracy very much for that introduction. I like that bio better than the one that my wife and kids, I think, have for me, which is just one line that says, he's okay. So that one I like more. We're going to go with that. I do have a bit of a presentation for you today. I'm going to try to share my screen here to see how, if I'm savvy enough to do that. Let's see. All right. Can you all see this? Let's see. Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay. So I'm just going to go through, this will not be exhaustive. I just want to go through a few slides here. It'll help kind of guide some of my thoughts. So I was asked to speak with you about equity and inclusion in education and youth development with the focus on the importance of equity and inclusion. But I'd say that I'm sure many or most of the organizations, if not all the organizations, recognize a lot about how and why it's important. So I'm going to focus my thoughts today on what I hope will be helpful information for you in building inclusive and equitable organizations to focus on education and youth development. So let's see here. Okay, so let's start with just a little bit of background of kind of how I got here in terms of doing this work in an educational space and how youth development kind of plays into that. So I started my career in corporate America. I came out of college, as was mentioned in my bio. I was a returning adult student. I went to 2 HBCUs, kind of lost my way at both of those schools, got a little bit more involved with being on the yard than I did being in class. Came home, I got married, had children, started working, but started getting to points in my career at the time where I found myself hitting a lot of ceilings. And a big reason for that, I thought, at the time was because I didn't really have the requisite higher education credentials to be able to move forward. In a lot of respects, that was true. So I went back to college, got my degree, and my bachelor's degree, and then things started moving a little bit more for me in my career. However, I kept noticing and running into these times where there seemed to be very little diversity at the top and a whole lot of diversity at the bottom of the organizations. And I found myself in that bottom area. And so I was always taught that you have to be and create the opportunities that you want to see. And so I started doing some investigating and looking into what happens with minorities in corporate America and how that needle moves forward, and came across these diversity and inclusion initiatives that seem to be rather prevalent within organizations. And so I decided that that was the work that I wanted to do. And so I started out in supplier diversity, helping minority and women-owned businesses gain opportunities, vendor opportunities and contracting opportunities with our company. And so I thought it would be fairly easy. I was in the city of Detroit. There was a lot of minority and women-owned businesses there. I thought it'd be as simple as going out and identifying those who provided the goods and services that we needed and bringing them in and introducing them. As long as they had competitive pricing, we would be okay. What I kept running into was people who, although it seemed as if it would be a fairly easy and reasonable thing to do, there are people in positions who were making the decisions who did not necessarily have an understanding, grasp, or quite frankly, an interest in ensuring that we were being inclusive in our diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. And so as that work expanded, it started moving into the workforce area. And I became involved in helping to recruit, trying to recruit and retain more minority and women employees for the organization, and kept getting these kind of hidden walls. And was told, we would love to do this, and we certainly will do more recruiting from other types of schools, but there seemed to be a bias towards certain colleges and universities, and in most cases, they were the alma maters of the people who were at the highest levels of the organization, and the schools that they came from weren't very diverse. So it wasn't very likely that we were going to get a lot of candidates coming into the organization. And so as I looked into that and started trying to understand a little bit more, it came to be known to me that the discussions and focuses needed to happen early, right? By the time folks got into those corporate positions and certainly got into positions where they were decision makers, the die had already been cast. They'd already made their decisions about who they were, but who other people were and what they could do. And so hearing a lot about the focus being more so, needing to be more so on what's happening in colleges, right? How are colleges and universities preparing the future employees to come into the workforce, and what, quite frankly, are they doing for particularly minority students, but minorities and women to be able to be successful in the workplace? And I was kind of pointed by corporate America to higher education to do this work and to try to address the issues before they got to corporate America. And so when I was in corporate America, the focus clearly was on equity and inclusion, but then got pointed more to education, got to higher education, and came to really begin to understand more about the importance of starting even earlier and at the times and in the times and lives of the students and children that you all are working with most. I was on 3 campuses before coming to my current position. All of those campuses focused on traditional age students, 18 to 24-year-olds. And so I watched the dynamics. I certainly wanted to learn about their experiences. What I kept seeing was students on these campuses who were minority students in particular, who were in some ways self-segregated. They were finding their sense of belonging on the campuses with each other because they weren't feeling connected to the broader institution, right? And so I want to find out a little bit more about that. And in some respects, it was clearly the systems and structures and policies and practices of the institution itself. There was embedded bias in various places, and that was the work that we needed to do. We needed to dismantle it. And as the Chief Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Officer, my job was to help to dismantle those systems and structures that was caused those students who had been historically disadvantaged, overlooked, and marginalized to feel the need to self-segregate so that they could find their sense of belonging. But I also wanted to understand the motivations behind students being able or feeling the need to do that. And as I talked to various students and started different organizations, we started an organization for men of color at 2 of the campuses I was on, and we named it the same thing both times. It's called Brother to Brother. And so I sat with them as a person with 3 sons, African-American men. That was an area, and growing up with 3 brothers, no sisters, the growth and opportunities and trajectories of African-American men was something that was of particular interest to me. And so as we connected and I learned more about their stories, I kept running into this common theme happening. And that was that when these students were in high school or in grade school or in earlier parts of their academic careers, they were met with information from adults, from caregivers, from teachers and counselors that was more deficit focused for them than asset based. And what I mean by that is I'll give you an example. There was one young man that I talked to, and he said that a common theme that he kept experiencing, he came from a pretty rough area in Chicago. And the thing that he kept hearing and experiencing was that it was going to be tough for him to make it out of the conditions that he was raised in, and that when he did, he was going to be somewhat of an anomaly, right? He was going to be he was going to be one of few who made it out, and that if he ever went back into that environment, it was very likely that he would pull back into the environment. So just stay away from it altogether. And he had a real hard time trying to figure out how to be able to continue to be loyal and true to his upbringing while also not becoming a victim of his surroundings. It wasn't very often that people were focusing on those who did make it out, let's say, of those environments. There always was this constant discussion in and around why it was going to be difficult for him and others, quite frankly, to move. And so that led me to understand that we had to really kind of, in some respects, deprogram students who had been in these situations where they were just constantly being told that the odds were against them, that the odds were against them. And so that translated to what they were learning about and being taught and seeing on campus. When the efforts that were made to connect with those students were happening, it also always was done in a very exclusive or discrete way, and didn't really necessarily connect with the broader picture. So that helped me to understand that there was some work to be done from a strategic, structural perspective on the campuses, but also some work to be done with those individuals to help build them up and help them to see themselves as assets and people who brought value. And it wasn't necessarily about beating odds, but more so changing odds. And so that is how I got to really focus my efforts in trying to meet this work and do this work as early in the development of our students and our children as possible. With that being said, I also recognize that there is a lot of influence and a lot of responsibility that's placed on the organizations and the individuals and the adults that are around these students and helping in their development. So I've focused my efforts, my career in helping organizations to do that, to become more equitable, more inclusive, or more equity-minded, I would say, in the work that they do. It's been a misnomer and something that I've been working on for some time. There's always been this talk about diversity, right? And so diversity really is just, it's the presence of difference, right? And so without inclusion and equity, diversity is just a reality. It's not an asset, it's not a competitive advantage, it's just a reality. When you have an additional focus on inclusion and equity, then you begin to see what can happen with diversity. But you have to be intentional about inclusion and equity. You don't have to necessarily be as intentional about diversity because you're gonna get it anyway. And so the work needs to happen in the spaces of inclusion and equity. There's also been some talk about equality, right? And the way that I discuss that is equality is important, but you can't get to equality if you don't have equity first. And so the real work has to happen in the spaces of inclusion and equity. So as I was doing this work, I just to organize it in my own mind, I knew that I had some questions, and the questions that kept coming up in my mind were always started with a why or a how. And these are just some examples of those questions that were coming to my mind. First, it was, why are we here? In a world that we have so many different types of people with backgrounds, cultural identities, and specifically areas where we know that there's a large concentration of diversity. Why do we not have more inclusion, and why do we not have more equity? Why do we find people from backgrounds that have been historically marginalized, underserved, or underrepresented? Why do those groups always rise to the top of the worst statistics and the bottom of the best statistics? And why do those gaps constantly persist? Why aren't they improving faster with all of the information and the technology and the ideas that we have? How come things aren't moving? Why aren't they moving faster? And more importantly, Why should people who don't look like me, why should they find this work important, right? Why should everybody feel that they have some ownership and authorship in helping to move the needle forward? Other questions. Now, how does it all tie together? I mean, we all hear all of these words that get thrown out: cultural competence and fluency and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And how does that tie into what happens in our daily lives, what happens in the work that we do, what happens in the children? How does it all fit together? How do we do it so that it's sustainable? How do we create sustainable strategies and practices around diversity, equity, inclusion? And then finally, how do we know it's working? What should we be expecting in terms of moving the needle? So the whys and the hows are where I have really focused a lot of my time and attention in trying to kind of get through this. And so I'm going to first talk about the whys. So I think that our success levels in diversity, equity, and inclusion are focused in two areas. One is what and how we think about these things, and secondly, what we actually do about them. And so how we think is based in our awareness of the issues and challenges, our attitudes toward them, the values that we have and how they relate to diversity, equity, inclusion, the norms that we were born, the norms and beliefs and unwritten rules that both guide our culture, but also our identities themselves. The very first culture that you get born into is your family. And so many of your norms and values and beliefs come from that. And then they kind of expand outward from there as you become more social. Right? But it's our awareness and attitudes. You know, an example is I just recently had a conversation with the governor, and the topic of Black Lives Matter came up, and I made a statement to him. I said, you know, Black Lives Matter, absolutely. That is a focus on the mortality of African Americans, but Black livelihood matters also. And so while we are absolutely focused on ensuring that there is not unjust murders occurring against African Americans, we also need to be finding ways to build and develop more opportunities so African Americans can have and move from the bottom of the best and the highest and the top of the worst. So it's changing our attitudes and focusing and centering on the larger issue, not just a smaller, the individual treatments that need to occur. So what and how we think about these things kind of really guide what ultimately we're going to do. So we have to win the battle of the mind first before we can move to action, right? And so action is our knowledge, our skills, and the learned rules that we have, and how we're willing to break some of those long rules or change our learning around the rules. And they're all types, right? We are continuing to build and learn every single day, not just broadly across cultures, but even sometimes in our own cultural identities. I mentioned to you earlier that I have 3 sons, and they're teaching me things every single day. They're teaching me new language. They're teaching me about what it means to be a Black man in their 20s in 2020, as opposed to when I was in my 20s, and we won't mention that date. But the point is that we still, we're constantly learning, and we have to be open to that to be able to know what to do and when to do it. Far too often, I've found that we are taking strategies and practices from yesteryear and trying to apply them to today's problem. Well, we've got to understand more about what's happening today and where to begin the work and how to do the work, how to begin the work before we figure out what it is we're actually going to do. So when I was trying to learn more about the whys, right? Trying to learn more about this idea of how to win the battle of the mind, I came across this book and this author, a psychologist out of Stanford named Carol Dweck. And she's got a book, some of you may know this book already. It's been out for some time. It's called Mindsets, the New Psychology of Success. And it focuses in on two important subjects: the idea that some people have a fixed mindset and some have a growth mindset. It started out really with Carol doing some experiments, let's say, or some studies on students, right? And so what she did was she took a number of students, seventh graders, I believe, and she provided them with some problems, right? And they were kind of math problems, but just riddles and problems in general that were, quite frankly, a little too difficult for them. And she just wanted to see how they reacted. Now, there were some students who came to it and said, "This is too hard. I can't do this." Just pushed it aside, resigned themselves that this is something that's a little bit higher than my level, and I'm just not going to do it. But she was fascinated to find out that there were students who, when they saw it, immediately took it on as a challenge. In fact, some of the students said, "Oh, I love a challenge. Great, this is a puzzle." And they kept working at it and working at it and working at it. And they were okay with not getting it right the first time. They found out, they were sent back, and then they tried a different way and come back again. And that didn't work. And so they try it, and then they got closer and closer. And then they started getting clues, and they used the clues to help them to solve. And ultimately, they got to their points of success. And it wasn't the success that gave them the gratification. It was the path to success that gave them that gratification. So what Carol discerned was that the fixed mindset are people who would say, "Listen, I am what I am. I know what I know, and this is it, right? I'm either gifted in this area or I'm not, and that's okay. There are certain areas that I know I'm going to be gifted, certain areas that I don't, and the ones that I'm not gifted, I'll just stay away from those altogether, and I'll just focus my attention in the areas that I think I can be successful." While there are others who would say that I can learn just about anything, and I might not become completely proficient at it all, but I know I can develop in these areas more than others. And so she took that work and she started to move it along, and has been a great consultant with school systems and others who work in the spaces that you work in. One example that she gives is that she gave some guidance to a school system where they have the traditional grading scale of A through F, right? And so that's a ranking, we know, right? It's like, if you get a C or better, you have passed, right? But there are different levels of passing. And so a student might pass with a B, but if someone else got an A, they still feel a little bit of a failure unless their target was to get to a B. And so she suggested that you take it more to a competency-based approach. And either a student has completed, but then if they didn't complete or pass, then the grade that they get is not yet, which meant that you have a chance to do it. We just got to work a little bit more. And that helps to build that growth mindset. And so as I think about equity and inclusion, I thought about how many times I ran into people who felt that their beliefs and their abilities were cemented around really kind of helping to create more equitable and inclusive environments. They really felt like there was such a wall between their cultural identities and the identities of others that they just would never be able to connect. And they weren't going to be visceral about it. They were going to be hospitable, and they were going to be folks who were welcoming, but they weren't really going to cross into the idea of connecting. And so it was a very multicultural approach. There are multiple cultures that exist, but it wasn't intercultural. It wasn't connecting across the cultures. And so I thought that it'd be best to focus on developing the growth mindset, and especially for folks who might have a fixed mindset around cultural equity and inclusion. And so within the organizations, I strongly would advise, if you haven't picked up this book or shared it with your organizations, that you take a look at it, because there's a need, I think, for all of us who are doing this work together to understand how to not only help the youth that you are serving to develop that growth mindset, but the people who are serving those youth also having that growth mindset. Far too often, we have heard where youth are kind of cats, right? You'll hear about somebody's background, and that's just what's happening in their lives. And we get surprised when they do something that they should be expected to do in the first place. So I highly recommend it. But I'm going to give you an example of a term that you've heard very often that really is more in the fixed mindset mode of thinking, right? So many of you have heard of cultural competence. Some people may even use the term, I know I used to use cultural competence when I was talking about how to help people to improve. And I thought it was a growth mindset focus. You know, you start from one place. If you look down in the corner on the left, you start from one area. When you become competent in something, you go from not knowing to knowing, right? Or you're on a path to knowing, right? That looks like growth. But the problem is that when we think we've become competent at something, then we stop learning, or I got it, right? This is the thing that I already know how to do it now. The other thing is that if we feel ourselves slowing down in our competencies, we might, or our development of that competency, we might have a tendency to stop and decide, you know what, I've been doing this for a while, I just can't really do it. If you don't believe that, you should come watch me play golf sometime and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. But the fixed mindset view is really kind of rooted in cultural competency. And so what I think we should be focused on is cultural fluency, right? And if you think about what it takes to become fluent at a language, for example, you may have taken 4 courses in Spanish or German or Greek or Russian, and you feel that you can speak it fluently, and then you go visit that country, and you realize that there are certain words that were never in that book that help to guide you becoming fluent. It is not until you really live amongst that culture that you find areas of fluency. It also means that there are times when you're going to get it right and times you're going to get it wrong. But the only way that you learn is by getting it wrong. Or quite frankly, when you get that validation that you've used it right. So cultural fluency is much more dynamic. It allows for us to make mistakes. It allows for us to build on what we've already learned. And so that is the really kind of the backbone of what cultural fluency is like. And so as we're thinking about our work, I think we should be focused more from an equity and inclusion perspective on becoming culturally fluent. Obviously, you got to start from somewhere. So competency still is a factor, but I think that is the precursor to becoming culturally fluent. And so I strongly recommend that you consider that as your approach. Now, back to the whys and the hows, right? And so as I started to construe all of these things, I came to realize that the why is really understanding the relationship between mindset, inclusion, and equity. If we're able to understand that relationship, then I think our efforts around education and development, and particularly youth development, become a little bit more crystal clear for us. So understanding mindset is important, but that's the why, right? So this is what motivates people or drives people. But now we've got to think about how we do it, right? How do you build more robust strategies and practices and systems and structures around diversity, equity, and inclusion to best educate your employees, educate the youth that you're working with, but also helping them to develop as individuals. And I think there's a couple strategies that I've identified that are pretty tried and true that I want to share with you now. So I've always thought that you've got to have a model, you've got to have some sort of a framework to build this work around. And then you've got to have an approach to doing the work. And so in the center there, you see this, little picture called inclusive excellence, right? That's the model that I think that we should use. And then the approach is around collective impact. So let me talk a little bit about inclusive excellence. So inclusive excellence is actually a model that was introduced to higher education back in 2005 by the American Association of Colleges and Universities. And the reason that it came forward was there was this continuing argument or disagreement or debate about diversity, equity, inclusion on higher education campuses. The idea was, should you be focused on the educational quality, improving the quality of the education, or should we be focused on bringing in a more diverse student population, recognizing that not all of those students are coming with the same levels of academic preparation and experience. And so if you're bringing in people who have lower levels of academic preparation, and this was the assumption, if you're bringing in folks who may have lower levels of academic preparation, then are you denigrating the ability to achieve higher levels of quality? It was flawed thinking for two reasons. Number one is it assumes that everybody is starting from the same place and has the same opportunity to achieve the academic preparation for college. The second thing is that it should never be an either or. It should be an and. And so inclusive excellence sought to kind of put the argument to rest by saying that both need to act together, operate together, and if you're really focused on connecting the two, then the assumptions and the misnomers should go away. So inclusive excellence focuses on 4 areas. And so while it's been applied to higher education, I really believe that it can be applied to any organization or institution. And so I've kind of tweaked it a little bit to be more focused in on organizations and corporations and businesses outside of the higher education sector. So the first is access and equity. And that's a focus not just on the compositional numbers. So we all kind of look at our data. We look at our quantitative data. We will do all kind of demographic studies and we'll say, here's where everybody falls, right? So it's a focus on the compositional numbers and the success level. So if we go back to my experiences in corporate America, where you have very little diversity at the top and a whole lot of diversity at the bottom, if you aren't focusing on the success levels of those who are coming into the organization, then you're always going to have that gap, right? So certainly you want to look and see in a disaggregated way where people are in your organizations and where, quite frankly, where the students that you're serving are fitting in. But you also have to have a pathway for them to be successful. You have to provide access to success for them. And so that's the first area of focus for inclusive excellence. The second is diversity in the core organizational drivers, right? So that's the offerings and experiences that you provide to the children that you serve, but also the experiences for your employees. So at one of the institutions that I worked at, we started looking at this, and we looked at diversity in the curriculum and the co-curriculum, right? And I was looking at the student organizations that we had on campus, but I also was looking at the practices of our faculty and how they were teaching, what they were teaching. And so, you know, we had the African American Studies courses and all of the cultural courses, and the thought was that that box was checked. But when we looked deeper into that, I started asking questions like, who are the authors that we're using in our courses for students to be able to gain information, right? Do we have is there a diversity in the literature, right? Who's writing the literature? When we look at the co-curricular experiences, are we just focused on cultural awareness months? Are we integrating cultural awareness in every single month? So it's looking at those things to identify within your organizations, how do we build and mold the programming that we offer? We had at one campus, we had a situation where there was an intentional effort to help people understand socioeconomic difference. And to do that, they decided, and some of you maybe have experienced these, but they decided they were going to do a poverty simulation, right? And so they were going to show how people who live in extreme poverty, the types of choices that they have to make on a daily basis to raise, I guess, levels of empathy in those who may not have to make those same decisions. The problem with that was it included students who that was their lives. That's how they lived every single day. And so it was almost like putting their lives on display and as an example of what not to do or how to not get yourself in a situation, when many of them were in a situation of no fault of their own or no choice of their own. And so we had to get away from that and find a different way to teach that lesson, but to do it in a much more inclusive way. So diversity in those drivers and in the programming that you have is very key and important. I think if there was any bubble that was bigger than the others, I would say that the organizational or institutional climate is extremely important, right? This is where your qualitative data comes from. You don't really understand climate unless you ask people how they feel. This is when people are able to express to you if they truly feel like they have a sense of belonging, either in the organization or through the services that you offer, right? And so that is everything from ensuring that everyone has the access and ability to participate, but that people can bring their whole selves to the organization, to the situation, and that the assets that they bring are integrated into the overall success levels of the organization. So that you can do climate studies to determine how people feel. You can have focus groups, but it truly is a qualitative measure that you need to take. You need to talk to the students, to the youth that you are serving and just on a regular basis to understand the field. And then the last one I would say is learning and development. We're all growing in this space. We're all trying to learn more. And if you aren't creating an environment that allows for more intercultural development for your employees and moving in a path of helping to achieve cultural fluency, then you're probably going to have a difficult time becoming a truly inclusive and equity-minded organization. So you want to continue to provide opportunities for growth and development for all of your employees and the people you serve. Now, in each of all of these things, there are certain levels that help to ensure the success. And so the Inclusive Excellence model provides for certain success levels. So for each of those individual areas, access and equity, diversity in the core drivers, climate, learning and development, you have to have vision and buy-in. There's got to be some levels of leadership and accountability. You've got to be able to build the capacity both internally, right, through the human resources that you have, as well as the financial resources to do those things. And finally, when you don't have them, you've got to leverage others to be able to do it. And so within each one of those things, it's critical and important to ensure that everybody recognizes and understands how important and what a priority it is for the organization. That's the model. Now let's talk a little bit about the approach. And I know I'm running short on time here, but I'm almost at the end. So the approach that I'm recommending is one that you all may be familiar with. As a matter of fact, this is one that is largely used in the nonprofit space. It's called collective impact. This was introduced in 2011 by a group of social scientists from Stanford University. And it really is a way to make large-scale social change, large-scale change occur when the issues and challenges are mainly social cultural. Right? And so they recommend 5 conditions for collective impact. The first is having a common agenda. That's the vision and buy-in, right? Making sure that everybody is bought in and on the same page relative to what needs to be accomplished. Mutually reinforcing activities. So you'll have things that are in different areas, but oftentimes they become disparate or disconnected. And so we've got to make sure that if you are focusing on recruiting a more diverse workforce, then you got to have efforts to retain that diverse workforce as well. Using a shared measurement tool, a way to be able to collect and report data, right? So that everybody understands, and something that is shareable with other organizations as well. Continuous communication is important. You've heard a lot about employee resource groups. at organizations, culturally focused employee resource groups. I think that that's an important strategy because it helps to engender communication from some in your organizations that may not feel as included or have faced equity challenges. And then finally, backbone support. That means that the efforts have to be supported from the very top of the organization, but you've also got to have champions and drivers within the organization to help move equity and inclusion forward. Now, here's my caution to you. As a former chief diversity officer, I experienced this, so I know that this is true. You bring in somebody or identify somebody who helped lead the charge, and then the assumption is that they own it. Their job is equity and inclusion, and it all kind of falls over to them. I don't think that they should own it. I think that their job should be to franchise it and make good owners of the organization culture of everyone else, right? And so their job should be to help everyone else become mini chief diversity officers, if you will. That means that they will help to lend the support, to provide advice, direction, and strategy. But the people who will execute the strategy is everyone else in the organization. And this person helps to strengthen them to be able to do. So in closing, I'll just give some five quick points that I think were important for you as it relates to inclusion and equity in the work that you do in youth development in educating us all. So the first is, I think you have to strategically plan for inclusive excellence. You have to make sure that inclusive excellence in those different areas that we discussed are somehow related to your overall strategic plan within the organization. You've got to integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion goals, objectives, strategies, and tactics within your overall planning for the organization. The second is that you've got to find a way to empower all, right? There are people at every level of your organization. There are people out in the community who can help, but you've got to know which voices are being muted or not heard as loudly, and help to empower them so that they can help and feel like they've got a way to be able to contribute to the success of the organization. The third, as I mentioned before, create collective impact. Think about how you all can work together as organizations. I think CICF is doing a wonderful job of helping to bring you together, but you all have a similar purpose. You have different areas that you're targeted and focused on, but you all have a similar purpose. How can you come together for collective impact, and how can you make sure that occurs within your individual organizations? The fourth is advance a focus on equity mindedness. Remember, you can't get to equality until you have equity. So find the gaps and focus on closing the gaps. And then the fifth is to develop and enhance cultural fluency, not competence, but fluency. That's my talk for you this morning. I'm looking forward to taking your questions or hearing more from you in the Q&A section of the panel. Hopefully this was enlightening for you. I hope it was meaningful, and I'll look forward to hearing from you more.
That was awesome. Thank you. I appreciate your time, and we got a lot of great questions already in, so we will have those geared up for you during the panel session. At this time, everyone, we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. If you need to use the restroom or anything, I'm going to pop up another poll, and I'd like you to take that, and I will see you back in about, let's say, 9:52. Does that work for everyone? All right. Can everyone see the poll all right? Okay. Gonna give it about 1 more minute for everyone to get their votes in, and take as much time as you need, and we'll kick it off with Tracy again. All right, we're gonna go ahead and close it, and I will share our results. Everything is anonymous, so don't worry about anyone knowing what your actual vote was. Everything is anonymous, and we will have one more poll after this on our last break, but we are going to go ahead and move forward so we're not taking up too much more time. And Tracy, if you can kick us off.
Thanks, Maddie. Hi again. Now we're going to hear from Dr. Lori Desautels, who will speak on how youth serving professionals help facilitate social and emotional learning and well-being. Dr. Lori Desautels has been an assistant professor at Butler University since 2016. There, she teaches both undergraduate and graduate programs in the College of Education. Her passion is engaging her students through neuroscience as it applies to education by integrating mind-brain teaching, learning principles, and strategies into her coursework. Dr. Desautels has conducted workshops throughout the US and Dubai on mind-brain teaching and learning. She has created webinars for educators, clinicians, and administrators, illustrating how educators and students must understand their neuroanatomy to regulate behavior and calm the brain. Prior to her work at Butler, she was an assistant professor at Marian University for 8 years. There, she founded the Educational Neuroscience Symposium, where she helped grow the conference from 60 participants to over 400. Previously, Dr. Desautels has also worked as a school counselor, was a private practice counselor and co-owner of the Indianapolis Counseling Center, and a behavioral consultant for Methodist Hospital in Indianapolis. Dr. Desautels, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Tracy, and thank you, Maddie, for inviting me, and a big, huge thank you to all of you for spending this early September Thursday in front of Zoom yet again, right? Here we are. So I'm really honored to share with you today. And Sean, thank you for a great opening presentation. That was so clear and so succinct. And so I have enough to share with you for like 3 full days. So my PowerPoints, I'm gonna have to have Sean teach me how to do a really succinct PowerPoint. So with that being said, I do want to begin this morning by sharing with you, thank you for that really wonderful introduction, but really the core of my work is back in the classroom again. As a professor in higher ed, I don't know why we are not back in the classrooms. We lose touch. And I was a former teacher, special education teacher with children and youth with the classification of emotionally disturbed many years ago, and then a counselor. But what I learned is that these kids weren't disturbed at all. These are brilliant children and youth who have experienced significant adversity and trauma in their lives. And so that's my passion. It's what gets me up every morning, and I can hardly close my eyes at night because I just started in Lawrence Township. I'm in my 7th year co-teaching. I'm back in the classroom again. And it is, it's a lot, but I'm really super excited to be with 3rd and 4th grade this year on the ground level. And I've been with middle school for the past couple of years, upper elementary, early high school. So I am just thrilled to be at Harrison Hill and serving our home district, because all 3 of our children are Lawrence Township. We are a Lawrence Township family. So with that being said, I'm going to share my screen. This is going to go super fast. I'm just going to give you kind of an overview of the why. And I want you to leave today with a couple of practices too that you can take into your organizations. So I'm hoping that I can do that. And so Maddie, will you remind me of time too? Because I'm horrible about that. So will you just interrupt me and just say, Laura, you've got like 5 minutes?
No problem.
Okay, here we go. So I want to begin today, again, offering you resources, and because it's 40 minutes is not very long. So there is my website. So please just delve in, and if you can't find what you're looking for, please email me and I'll give you all my contact information. I want to start today with this quote because it means everything to me. The child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. And I see this every single day. All behavior, adult behavior, adolescent behavior, collective behavior, because emotions are so contagious, are signals. And all behavior is communication. So as we begin to delve into this a little bit, I want to be very authentic and say to you, this is as much about me as a parent, as a sister, as a daughter, as it is professionally. I hope in these few minutes together, you can really think about your own brain and body states. It's just critically important. And there are 2 conditions for all of us. Human beings need these conditions to learn well, to lead well, to live well, to teach well. And those conditions are feeling safe and feeling connected, feeling felt. And I just learned this morning from the newest research, NPR just shared this, that we now, looking at COVID, in this moment, 25% of individuals in this country are experiencing depression, and it has tripled in the last 6 months. So we are in a time like no other. I started at Lawrence 3 weeks ago. We were hybrid. We're wearing face masks. The children and the youth are pretty melancholy right now. They're feeling pretty displaced. There's quite a bit of, I think, just feelings and sensations underneath. And so we can expect this time to have pretty significant impact in the years to follow. So, but I will share the good news with you too. So we are looking at racial trauma right now. We're looking at systemic trauma. We are looking at historical trauma and generational trauma. And we are understanding that collective trauma literally shifts where the brain and body are functioning from. So just, helping you to understand a little bit of the why here. Our brains are built from the very back to the front and from the inside out. And when we come into this world, most of us, if it has not been a premature birth, have our brain stems on board. And that brain stem is where we do every autonomic function without thinking. So it's our breathing, and it's our digestion, and it's our sleep. The rest of the brain is waiting for experiences. And I cannot emphasize that enough. The brain acts like a muscle. It's an organ, but it is experience dependent. And so when we think about the experiences of our children and of our youth, they are generational. And I'm studying the work right now, and I wish I had more time to share it with you today, but he is a trauma therapist out of Minneapolis. His name is Resma Menicum. And his work is talking about body trauma and generational trauma, Black body trauma, white body trauma, police body trauma. And what I'm learning each day is that we are now able to trace 14 generations of trauma. So children do inherit experiences. They inherit environments and values and belief systems, but it's generational. So we are going into schools and we are addressing procedures and rituals and routines right when school begins right now. And as they leave us, we are wrapping them up with brain-aligned social and emotional practices, which you can do at camp, you can do anywhere. I mean, these are practices not only for children, they're for us. So we are addressing the amygdala, which is the fight-flight area of the brain. It's our vigilance center. It's not really about negative emotions. It's where the fight-flight pathways and the frozen dissociative pathways begin to become activated. And so many of us as adults and many of our children right now have a new normal. I mean, our fight flight is activated all the time right now during everything that's happened. So these practices are addressing the calming of the nervous system while we're activating this prefrontal cortex. So right here behind your eyebrows, if you put your hands on your forehead, right behind here, this is where we do life and it's where we do school. It's where we make decisions, where we problem solve, we have sustained attention, emotional regulation. And this part of the brain is literally not fully developed until late 20s to early 30s. So we know that our children and youth right now are coming in with appropriately underdeveloped cortex areas, but trauma and adversity and collective trauma, all of this, plus addiction and alcohol use, substance use disorder, which sometimes in adolescence is not very clear, it's a very gray area, can actually compromise the development of the prefrontal cortex. The hippocampus is that's our memory center. It encodes memory. So these are the areas that I'm addressing this morning. This is probably one of the most important slides I can share with you. And I just shared this. We are giving this to administrators around the country. And we're also giving this to high school kids. So if you work with adolescents, it's called the polyvagal graph. And feel free to take pictures of any of these slides. And I can send a PDF to you. But down in this green area, Dan Siegel shares what you can name, you can tame, and what is shareable is bearable. So down in this green area, we are functioning for the most part from our cortex. And this is where we are calm and relaxed. We feel safe, we feel grounded, we feel focused. But then we get annoyed, we get irritated, we get worried. So we amp up here into this fight-flight response, which is where your heart rate goes up, your respiration goes up, your blood pressure goes up. And that's normal. We all get irritated and anxious. And so we fluctuate all day long, every day, in these brain states. But what concerns me are many of us, this is our normal up here. You can see my mouse. This is where most of us function, but I've seen many students coming back over the last month. I've seen many teachers and staff and faculty functioning up here. And this is when you are living in survival brain state. And when your body and brain are in survival, you can't access the prefrontal cortex. So I don't care, what type of curriculum you've laid out or what type of agenda. When we are in survival, we don't hear words. We don't hear language. It's not, the language of the survival brain is sensation. The language of the survival brain is feelings. This up here is a different pathway. So we're not putting fight, flight, freeze together. Fight, flight is survival, and you are ramping up to run or to fight. So your pupils dilate, an oxygenated flow goes to the limbs, your digestion shuts down. But in immobilized and frozen, this is where the body prepares to be injured, or it prepares to die. And we are conserving all of our energy. And so for youth, we see youth living up here. Sometimes we see a significant depression or detachment, or children are cutting. There's a withdrawn, there's a lot of shame, addiction begins up here, suicidal ideation. This concerns me. We see high absenteeism in school. We see very little work to no work being turned in. These kids disappear from us. This is where shame lives. It's internalized guilt and shame, but much more than guilt is shame. So this is where, again, it is a parasympathetic response, meaning your heart rate and blood pressure and respiration lower, but to a dangerous level. So what I'm talking about today, and we are implementing this, whether you work in a recovery program, whether it doesn't matter what organization. And as a mom of my 3 children when they were little, I would have used this framework at home with Andrew, Sarah, and Reagan. So it's not a program that I'm talking about today. It stands on 4 pillars. And it has the very first pillar of this work is educator brain and body state. I cannot emphasize this enough. If I am dysregulated and I am coming into a classroom, into an organization, to my family, to my own children, and I'm dysregulated and rough, I cannot discipline well, I cannot parent well, I cannot work with another very well, because it takes a calm nervous system to calm another nervous system. Co-regulation is sharing our calm with another. And this is the core of the new lens of discipline. Touch points is the 3rd pillar of this framework, and it's strengthening relationships. I posted this early this morning in our chat. You don't have to have a personal relationship with everyone that you meet, but the key is to be relationally present and relationally respectful. The 4th pillar of this is teaching our kids and ourselves what is the science beneath how we feel. I cannot tell you, these were my kids 2 years ago. In IPS, these were my middle school, 6th grade and 7th grade. And I co-teach, as I mentioned to you, 2 days a week. I'm back in the classroom. We had just learned about the amygdala. And that's why I took this picture. We were talking about the amygdala hijack. When you understand the science beneath your behavior, because we can talk about mindfulness and we can talk about, sensory and regulation, but you've got to talk about you've got to give our kids the actual science, because they feel empowered and they feel relieved to know I'm not a bad kid and there's nothing wrong with me. My daughter Reagan and I sat together this summer, and this is really what we're talking about right now. It is so brave to love for so many of our youth, so many of us right now, because we know that many of our children and youth come to our organizations. They come into our communities asking for love in the most unloving ways. And I want to share this before I forget to say this in this brief amount of time. If you grow up in an environment and you have not been exposed to kindness, you don't develop the circuits in the brain for kindness. If you grow up in an environment and you don't develop the circuits in the brain for empathy, you don't know. Not only do you not know, you don't have the cognitive circuitry to put yourself in someone else's shoes. So these are not soft skills. They're not warm, fuzzy extras. This is a part of development that is critical. If we talk about social and emotional learning, we've got to be talking about the brain. So briefly, trauma and adversity happen on a continuum. And what most of us misunderstand is that it is body overwhelm. And I'm learning this from Resma Menachem too. And I'm going to show you before I end just like one of his slides. Body overwhelm is when, and listen to this, this is amazing research. This is from Bonnie Badenoch and Dr. McGilchrist research. Every second of every day, all of us are getting about 11 million bits of sensory information coming into to us. And that lands in the right centric areas of the brain stem, the limbic system, but a lot of it, if not most of it, lands in our bodies. It's when that sensory fragmented information is coming in too much, too fast, and too soon. And we call that implicit memory, body memories. It's below consciousness. So when I go into schools and districts and when I work with organizations, we talk about specificity, getting the brain to the cortex, helping us to understand as adults, adolescents, and children how we meet each other where we are in brain and body state. We're not talking about behavior. So trauma and adversity are not cognitive. They are physiological nervous system challenges. And this is a big shift for us to make because all chronic behavioral issues are not anything but physiological regulation issues and their nervous system issues. So as we think about trauma and adversity and how it's impacting all of us in so many capacities right now, when it lands in the body, I want you to think of these two quotes. The body remembers what the mind forgets. If you want to know the way the wind is blowing, you've got to look at the sand. And if you want to know how a student or a child or an adolescent is feeling, look at her body. But the good news, and this is, Carol Dweck talks about this in growth mindset, is resiliency. And another word for resiliency is neuroplasticity. The brain, here's the beautiful thing. We have a superpower, and we share this with kids. When I share this with 9-year-olds and 8-year-olds and 6-year-olds, it is so exciting to see their eyes light up. We have a superpower, and that's neuroplasticity, because the brain is built to repair and heal and not to break. And when we have the conditions of safety, when we have the conditions of connection, and when we can share that empathic awareness, healing begins. So I do want to mention this piece to you before I continue. Brain development is not just genetically encoded, and I cannot emphasize this enough. Our medical schools are not teaching this yet. Certainly our high schools are not. Our universities are not. I am so honored to go to Marian University to speak at the osteopathic medical school with third-year medical students each year. And what we now understand is that our genetic determinism is the sequence of the gene does not change. It's the function that changes. Epi means above the gene. So we now are learning, and this is why trauma is 14 generations. Your environments, your relationships, your experiences change the way the gene is encoded and read and expressed. But more than that, it's your perception. It's your beliefs and it's your feelings that have an impact on how the cell is exposed and read. So in early development, out of the womb, babies are capable of sensation. They sense their worlds, they feel their worlds, and they perceive their worlds. Resiliency occurs, and this is the best news for all of us. It doesn't happen over just boom, a long conversation. It happens in those minute-to-minute exchanges. 93% of our communication is nonverbal. So it's read from the eyes up, it is in our tone, it's in our posture, and it's in our gestures. And this is what we are helping our pre-service teachers to understand, because if you're going to be trauma responsive as an organization, as a school, and as a district, we have to understand that it's the adult, that the behavior management, discipline, leadership is about the adult. It is not about the child. And when I'm calm and when I can share my calm, then we see a new lens through which discipline occurs. And this is the work that we're doing right now. So, Maddie, how much time do I have left? I forget what time I'm ending.
You're good. You have about a little less than 20 minutes.
Okay, perfect. So I want to share just a couple more of these pieces with you, and then I'll give you some practices, because it doesn't feel good not to leave without something to try. So Harvard just came out with this new research this year, and it's my 4th bullet point here. 1 million new synapses are occurring in the brain in the first year of life. I can't get my head around that either. 1 million new synapses. The brain is sticky in the first 1,000 days of life. And you might be working with 18-year-olds or 25-year-olds or 13-year-olds. But what we know is that those first 1,000 days, those experiences stick to the brain like Velcro. Trauma is invisible. And when we talk about, looking at adversity and trauma, it can leave scars on the emotions, which are stored as chemicals in the cells. And it's likened to running on injured knees before they're healed. All of us move through life and we predict experiences based on experiences. And that's really critical for us to understand. So as we think about brain development and the why, we got to understand the why before we move forward. Trauma is an embedded experience touching all of the neural pathways. And I think if you leave here today with nothing more than this, these last 2 bullets, we ache to be heard and held in the reality of our experiences without judgment or any impulse toward being fixed. Healing trauma is holding a safe, warm, stable, responsive space. And we need embodied experiences to counteract that trauma. And that's why restorative and reparative relational discipline is so important. So, couple more points, and then I'm going to switch PowerPoints because I want to talk to you about generational, historical, and racial trauma just for a couple of minutes. I want to ask a question, and I want you to think about your organization. I want you to think about your personal life. I want you to think about your own family. What if silence just arose when it wanted and left after it had done its work? So I want you to think about the healing potential of silence. We are not really using or implementing interventions. We are using the space in between to strengthen relationships and to build on what Sean talked about as growth mindset. What if we follow the child? I've been working with so many educators over the past couple of years, and we've been in school staff, working with bus drivers. We are training bus drivers in this work. Lunch school. My tongue is tied. Food service providers, school nurses. It takes all of us, custodial staff, support staff. But what if we follow the child and focus on the process? Because as Dr. Stephen Porges shares, a felt sense of safety is the bedrock of healing trauma. And understanding always that we wear our hearts on our faces and in our voices. So before I move to a couple of whys, I do want to share with you, let me see. I don't think I have it pulled up, and I don't want to waste your time. I'm going to just share with you a little bit of Resma's work here. So what he is sharing, and let me pull this here. So our early history is held in embodied implicit memory. Let me explain to you, he's written a book called My Grandmother's Hands, and I encourage you all to take a look at his work. He begins by saying, when we are looking at systemic trauma and racialized trauma and structural trauma, what we're looking at is the body. Because after the fall of the Roman Empire, over 1,000 years ago, 2 million white bodies were slain, were enslaved, were brutalized. And that generational those experiences were carried into America. And so we're looking at the last 3 to 4 centuries of not only white bodies, brutalizing white bodies, but those white bodies coming in and brutalizing Black and brown bodies, or bodies of culture. And so what he is sharing is that the battlefield, when we truly address racism at its core, the battlefield is in our bodies. And I'm very excited to share this work as I'm learning about this. But what we have to understand is that those racial wounds that Dr. Kenneth Hardy talks about from Drexel, our kids go through the second greatest time of brain development, starting at around 9, 10 through high school. And this is when we see these racial wounds begin to appear: voicelessness, devaluation, a distorted sense of identity. And school's the de facto. School is where parents and community and children and adolescents are. And so this is the good news, because we can begin addressing our own white body supremacy and its impact on our children and youth. Because white body supremacy is in the air we breathe, it's in the water we drink, it's all around us. And so when we think about these embodied implicit memories, they are continual whispers of these subjective truths that play an important role in shaping how we perceive our lives and our relationships. And they move to long-term storage, and they affect our bellies. We have a belly brain, a heart brain, we have a skull brain, and we have bidirectional communication between all of those brains. And when we're functioning collectively in a survival brain state, then we are not able to access the cortex. That's why we can have book studies on racism. We can have restorative practices on anti-racism. We can learn about anti-racism, but it's cognitive. It doesn't really hit us. And it doesn't address the core until we look at this body generational racialized trauma. So I promised to leave you today, so I apologize for moving through. See, I have so much for you, but I do want to share with you how important it is right now for your organization, as you plan for this coming year, to think about creating walls of lived experiences for the children and adolescents and the parents and the families and communities you sit beside. When we draw, color, use art, give image, give line, give smells, give tastes, when we can get it out of the brain body, and the right hemisphere has more of a direct pathway to the body than the left, then we put it in a safe container outside of us, and it dampens down the nervous system. So we right now are beginning to create these lived experiences in the form of graffiti walls, but our staff, our teachers are doing this. Our kids are working on these. And I want you to think about the power of images. We're using these type of questions for these embodied experiences, because this is what we're talking about today. How has the virus of COVID affected me and my family? Draw it, give it line, give it shape, give it color. Where do I feel this in my body? What are the colors and lines and shapes? What have been the hardest parts of being isolated and at home for the last 6 months? What has been the best part of being at home? What have been my strengths? I mean, what have been your strengths, all of you, during the last 6 months? What has been challenging? What has felt safe or unsafe to you? So that is something that we're really looking at. And I've been talking and working on this racial discipline gap for the last several years. And I'm so grateful that Stanford has come out with a new peer-reviewed national study. So it's really, now we can see that these adversity gaps, these racial discipline gaps, are intimately tied to achievement gaps. We misunderstand so much right now that the door is opened and we are learning. So please look up Dr. Kenneth Hardy's work. It's excellent. And let me see, I'm just going to, I know I have just a couple of minutes, so let me, I want to end with this.
You're good.
Am I good? How much longer do I have?
10 minutes.
Oh, perfect. Okay, then, okay. I'm just gonna, so I want you to take a look at this. So this is from the Circle of Courage. I can see everybody today implementing these questions in your organization. Please feel free to take pictures of any of these too. I think I mentioned that. But when we feel that we are important to somebody in our environment, this creates this sense of safety and connection. When I am good at something in my environment, then I feel connected and I feel safe and I have purpose. When I feel that I can influence people in my world, then this is autonomy. And when I can share my gifts to help others, then again, I have a sense of autonomy and mastery and purpose. And I have the ability now to be appreciative. So these 4 universal growth needs, we are sharing with districts and organizations as we delve into brain-aligned discipline and helping our children and adolescents and the adults in organizations to really look to see, leaders and administrators, is this something that everybody is experiencing? And so we begin looking at languages. You know, what is this is a great, I'm showing you this slide because this would be so cool to do with your organization. So what do you do when you get upset? So what is your language of adversity, internally and externally? Do you shut down? Are you quiet? Do you cry? Does your neck get blotchy? Does your stomach start to hurt? Does your heart start to beat? Can you not get a deep breath? When you identify those, it is powerful in dampening down the stress response systems in the body. Then how do you recover? So when I speak through it, maybe I talk about it, I call someone, I text someone, I go outside, nature helps me to recover, I exercise to recover, I eat wheat thins to recover. I mean, we all have these languages of resiliency. And when we identify our organizations, then we can begin to share that with the youth that we work with. Because again, it goes back to the first pillar of this framework. A calm, regulated adult can calm and regulate a child. And when we think about co-regulation is sharing my calm. This is amazing. I have to share this with you, and then I'll start to wind down. So these are my great niece and nephew. My sister just had her first grandchildren. I can't even believe saying that, just feels weird to me. Brooks is on the left, Avery's on the right, and Laura sent these to me over the summer. Avery was hysterical. She could not calm down. She was crying. Her passy wouldn't work. Holding her didn't work. She just kept escalating, and Laura was worn out, the mother. She laid her down next to Brooks, and within seconds, Brooks looks at her, and then he takes her hand. And immediately Avery begins to get grounded and settles and calms. We are capable of this out in the first several weeks of life. We have the potential out of the womb if we are exposed to this, because the brain is a social organ. We cannot survive without connection. It's experience dependent. It acts like a muscle, because whatever you put your brain on, it gets worked out. Whatever you stop doing begins to atrophy. And this is called relational regulation. Whether you're working with 18-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 8-month-olds, we share our face, we share our tone, we share our posture, and we share our gestures. So I'm going to go to the end now. And you can see that I have so much to share, but I am going to just end with this slide. what we're looking at, and this is what my new book is about, rewiring our perceptions of discipline, connections over compliance. Many of us really are not, when we think of discipline, we think of punitive, we think of consequences, we think of painful or uncomfortable. And what we understand is that the behaviors of the chronic behavioral challenges we are seeing in our youth and children are pain-based behaviors, and traditional discipline does not work with these children and youth. We are unintentionally reactivating their stress response systems, and we are unintentionally re-traumatizing. So the work that, when I go into schools, and the work that we are doing right now is focusing on discipline. And again, I would have used this as a mom on the front end. It's tier 1 practices. It is focusing on procedures and routines and rituals through connection. And so, and I want to leave you with this thought today. When you change your language, you change your perspective. And when you change your perspective, you change your biology. Think about the word consequences. What if we asked, instead of what consequences does my son need so that he makes curfew every night? Or what consequences does this child need so that he is not screaming and yelling every time he is given the word no? What if we replaced with the word experiences? What experiences does Andrew need so that he can make curfew each time? What experiences does this child need so that he is able to stay calm when he is unable to do what he wants to do? So this is part of this new lens of discipline. So I'm just going to go through and give you my contact information. Feel free to take a picture of this slide. I'm sorry, you might want to close your eyes as I go through this. And this is what I didn't get to. We're going to be addressing, in neuroscience, you don't ever sit and rest. We're looking, a big piece of this work right now is looking at these hidden wounds of racial trauma and what we can do in the classroom. And I'm going to be sharing more and more of this through this framework. So that's why I wanted to give you my social media information. And this is our book that many districts are using right now. Michael McKnight and I wrote this together. This is my new book. You can pre-order it right now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, what I've been talking about today. And here is my contact information. So please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, follow me on Facebook. Here's my Butler email. I would love to hear from you. And the website, LinkedIn, Instagram. I just can't thank you enough, and I'm sorry to be rushing through this. Maddie, thank you so much. And thank you all again for inviting me just to share just a teeny little tip of the iceberg of this work.
Thank you, Lori. That was fantastic. And you'll have a little bit more opportunity in the panel to chat, because I know we've got a lot of questions coming in, which is super exciting. And the work that you're doing is fantastic and so critical right now during COVID. So I know that it's not in the agenda, but we're going to take a really quick break, 2 minutes again, just to decompress after some heavy material and get ready for the panel. If you, during this break, everyone, I'm going to save our last poll for the last break after the panel that helps inform us, or the funders, and us as a serving agency to provide you what you need. So for this break, if you can, please send me all questions you may have. You can do it privately, you can do it through the general chat. That way we can make sure that we are asking the panelists what you really need to know coming up. So coming up during the panel, it's going to be Dr. Lori, Dr. Sean, and Representative Taisha from the Lilly Foundation, and Representative Lupe from our Central Indiana Community Foundation. So stay tuned for that. You'll be able to ask whatever questions, knowing who's on the panel. Just pop in your questions and we'll be ready for you. See you in 2 minutes. All right, is everyone back? Let's go ahead and get started with our panelists. We've got Lori, Sean, Taisha with the Lilly Endowment, and Lupe with CICF for our panelists today. We're going to kick it off with a question for Dr. Huddleston. Can you speak to the cultural humility and how to infuse these concepts into our program delivery?
Oh, wow, that is a very deep question there. Cultural humility, right? And so essentially, I think what the person who asked the question is referring to is kind of twofold. And so I hope I answered this correctly, right? So on one hand, one should not be asked to check their cultural identity at the door if it means for the sake of making someone else feel comfortable. At the same time, I think that we also have to make sure that we are open and understanding and empathetic, not sympathetic, but empathetic to the cultural identities and needs associated with those identities of other people. So I'm hoping that is what the writer of the question meant when they said cultural humility. And if I'm right, I think it really goes back to this whole idea of cultural fluency, right? I think that on the one hand, every intercultural connection and relationship, and I want to make sure that I'm clear when I'm saying this, because you've heard the terms multicultural, you've heard intercultural, you've heard all these other things. Intercultural really is about the interconnectivity of cultures, right? The relational aspects of people connecting culture. And so with that being said, through cultural fluency, it's a continuous learning process and opportunity for the individuals who you're encountering, but also for you yourself, right? And so infusing cultural humility in your program and the work you're doing means essentially infusing the idea of intercultural development in the work that you're doing from the perspective of how different cultures connect and intersect. The other thing that's important, and I don't want to belabor the subject, is we also need to understand the intersections of cultural identities, right? So it's one thing to have feelings about being African American or Latino or Native American, but it means something different as an African American male or female or Latinx or, based on gender and religion and a whole lot of other things. And so I think we also have to be sensitive to the intersections of cultural identity as you are implementing your programming. I hope that answered the question.
That was great. And I have a question for both of you, actually, because you both touched on this quite a bit in each of your presentations. We know that Black and Brown youth are overrepresented in the juvenile legal systems currently. And how do you think that youth serving professionals like our audience here today can help prevent those outcomes and change the narrative?
Wow, good question. Lori, would you like to start?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it has a definitive answer or a solution, but I think it begins with sharing the research. I cannot emphasize that enough. When people begin to understand the science, we don't hesitate to, embrace new medical procedures or technology. But boy, when you tell us to change the way we've always traditionally perceived, groups of people or practices, it's harder for us. So I think you begin sharing, if everybody in this presentation today could share the science, and I'll be happy, Maddie, to share some of that science, as resources, because we're pulling from many researchers. That's in a nutshell. I don't know, Sean, what do you think?
I think it's a two-sided solution or two-sided challenge, right? On the one hand, there is definitely institutional, systemic, and implicit bias within both the juvenile system as well as the prison system that we have. So Structurally, there are things that create pathways to the juvenile detention system and the prison system that exist that really kind of are meant to intentionally bring in more Black and brown children. I mean, that is just a fact. And so on the one hand, we have got to dismantle those systems and those structures, right? We've got to create an environment that provides more resiliency, but also limits the huge magnet that system has, in many ways, has been designed to do. So that's one side of it. I think the other side of it is within the individual communities, right? And ensuring that we are not creating this deficit-based thinking and this assumptions that the pathway to prison or juvenile detention is wider than the pathways to upliftment and freedom and so on and so forth. So I think that occurs by us ensuring that we are accentuating the positive pathways, those access, those things that allow greater access to education and higher education, and so on and so forth. But the access and utilization of education has to mean something. It has to be able to be applied to the overall growth, development, and upward trajectory of families and communities. We talk about this in higher education all the time, and I'm really, really focused on this. Learning just to learn doesn't work for Black and brown people and families, right? It's got to lead to something where they either become employees or employers. And as employees, the concept should be an idea of trajectory. And as employers, it should be building economically and developing the communities that allow for greater opportunity.
Yeah, and I want to add to that too. It begins with you've got to look at your discipline systems in your schools. I mean, this is a huge issue. The over-identification and the disproportionality of Black and brown children. We can look at early childhood and third grade reading scores and high school dropout rates. And there's just such a correlation to all of that. So this is, we've got to meet kids in brain and body state, and we've just got to rethink how we're looking at behaviors.
Awesome. Thank you both. That's certainly helpful for McCoy. We've been trying to emerge in that realm as well in a couple coalitions that we serve on. One of the things that Dr. Huddleston mentioned is when you feel competent, you kind of stop growing. And I've been privileged to hear, Lori, I've heard you speak before on how getting comfortable sometimes turns into complacency. And I know that a lot of youth serving workers kind of get into the same rut because you've seen it over and over and you've been around, and now we're in this whole new realm. Can you speak to your experience on getting to that competent level and how you overcame it? And maybe you just provide a couple tips on how to drive forward beyond that.
Yeah, so I feel I'm going to go back to, again, the neuroscience, because really the brain and body, that's where we do life. And, when you think about complacency and compliance, or not compliance, complacency and just feeling kind of, okay, I've done all I can do, I've reached the pinnacle. What the neuroscience is saying is that every experience we encounter, every child, every environment, every experience changes us. It changes the brain structurally and functionally. And so we're never really done. And our children today, and I think of, taking a functional MRI of kids today compared to 2 years ago, 5 years ago, there's a different neuroanatomy in that brain. I mean, our kids are, one of the adverse childhood experiences now is the social media piece. Kids are just, they are so, they're looking at, pleasure and reward and all of that through social media. So I think that, when we feel complicit, we've got to really look within and, and think to ourselves, how can I best serve, and what can I learn from this? I love, Sean, your graph that shows, it showed cultural competency with the, and that's what that made me think about. It's never, you don't just go to the top. I mean, it's really this beautiful dive and peak and dive and peak and dive and peak. So I know with teachers, we have a dual, and parents, we've got this dual brain reflection tracking sheet. And so when there's a poor choice made by a child or an adolescent, I fill it out too. I don't just put it in the kid's hands. I say, you know what, I could do better. So what am I going to do? What are 2 ways I can meet you? Because I didn't do it perfectly. So I think that's where, we've got it's a template that we use. And yeah, I could, I just think we've got to go within.
Did you want me to respond to that also?
You can if you want to, but I have another question.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Specific. Teresa with IUPUI would like to know regarding the inclusive excellence model, what specific types of professional development and tools have you used and have you found to be most effective?
Yeah, I think there's one that I swear by and became certified to utilize, and we'll be actually offering this in the Center for Racial Equity and Inclusion that's going to launch here at Martin University in January. It's called the Intercultural Development Inventory. IDI, some of you may have heard of it, but the Intercultural Development Inventory, and I've looked at them all. I've looked at the Cultural Intelligence Quotient Model and some of the other ones that do these kind of assessments and ratings. The reason that I like the IDI is that it does a couple things. Number one, the IDI measures how you think you will interact in an intercultural scenario and versus how you actually will act. And most people have a gap. And so it looks at that and it gives you an individualized plan to close that gap, right? So it kind of, you develop and assign yourself different tasks to be able to do that. But it also looks at groups. So it looks at the individual and then it takes the group of individuals, creates an aggregate score and looks at how the group thinks it acts versus how it actually acts. And so, or at what it actually does. And so when there are people within a specific group that feel marginalized or excluded or are experiencing inequities, this kind of teases out the fact that these things are rooted in the systems and in the culture of an individual group as well as a larger organization. And so I take the results of that and I apply the inclusive excellence model. Where do we have concerns in access and equity? Where do we have concerns in our core drivers? And where are we able to improve so that we execute more effectively in those things? So I highly recommend the Intercultural Development Inventory as one key tool to be able to help move that forward. If you want to learn more about inclusive excellence, there is a free publication that you can find by Google. It's called Toward a Model of Inclusive Excellence. If you just Google that, it'll come right up. It's a publication from, I think, 2005 or 6, but it really kind of gives you a lot of the background of the model. And then, we can certainly talk more about different strategies or methods to implement it. One other thing I'll say, I'm sorry, I know I'm talking long here. I think that you also have to have an inclusive excellence scorecard, which is a balanced scorecard that shows where you are in each one of those areas. If you're doing an organizational assessment, where you are, more importantly, where you want to go. And then again, a plan to close that gap. And so that goes to the measures and the methods and the accountability.
Awesome, thank you. We have one question for Dr. Lori. When you encounter a child who exhibits evidence of having endured trauma, what is the first step to building a relationship? what is the most important aspect of the posture to take in order then to continue to grow an in-depth relationship?
Well, again, it's not a formula and there's not a strategy. And that's where it's a process. And, I'm going to say this, and I apologize if I offend anyone by making this statement, but I want to say this to all of you, and as a reminder to myself, you've got to be happy when you get 15 F-offs on Monday and you get 14 on Friday. And so my point in saying this is that these behaviors, this trauma is pain-based. And these circuits in the brain are not going to you just don't start trusting somebody. You don't start relating to somebody. And so I think the greatest gift we can give students initially is a safe sanctuary. It is a space where they feel safe and we follow their lead. And I'm doing that right now at Harrison Hill. These kids didn't know me 3 weeks ago. So I'm giving them space and time. I'm watching my tone. I'm really paying attention to my body. And when I have that calm to share, I share it through validating them. There's nothing more powerful, we call these touch points, than validation. When a kid is really irritated or they are rough, when I can say, wow, I can't imagine how frustrating that must feel. Right there, I am beginning to use what we call that interpersonal in-between space, that sanctuary. So I wish I had a strategy, but I mean, really it's a process, and it begins with that. It begins with what I stated earlier. It's being relationally respectful and relationally available and present.
Perfect. Thank you. I know that can kind of get hard, especially as you said, people ask for love in the most unloving ways. And so to put it into that perspective, I think is hugely helpful. For Dr. So really quickly, on our agenda, we were supposed to be done at this point with the panel, but our last speakers, we're going to go super quick, like 5 minutes tops. If I can get a show of thumbs up if you want to continue for another 5 minutes with our question and answers, then we can continue on. Otherwise, I know I didn't get to everyone's questions, but we can certainly send out in our follow-up message, okay, we're getting lots of thumbs. Then we're going to go ahead and continue on with just the last couple ones for Dr. Huddleston. How do we connect to start on a path of equity and inclusion in education? Actually both, I think that this is a great question for both of you because you've worked hands-on and in separate ways. So.
This is that has been the $1 million question, I think, in higher education at every level. I think there are, or not just higher education at every level. I think there are a couple things that help to make it connect the stick. I think you've got to look at systems, structures, policies, and practices, right? You've got to create the foundation for inclusion and equity by really digging deep and addressing those things that are causing the barriers systemically and otherwise, right? The other thing that happens in education, again, at every level, is it becomes, and I'm sure Lori would agree with this, it becomes silo, right? And so we in education, I'll speak for higher education, we in higher education think that our challenges and opportunities are specific to higher education. We don't do a very good job of being collaborative and connective and using collective impact. We use collective impact internally, but we don't reach out enough. And so I think true collaborative networked partnerships that look at the whole student, right? So we look at what's happening in the classroom, outside of the classroom, in the family, in the community. and we create those pathways. That is what helps to develop student success. Martin University, our primary audience is adult students, right? We spend more time on supporting what's happening in their families and their lives outside of the class to ensure that they can be effective inside of the class. And so until we find ways to look at the whole child, the whole student, the whole parent, until we find ways to do that, we're going to have a hard time really understanding inclusion and equity. And from a higher education perspective or an education perspective, we need to know what's going on in communities and determine how we are to be an anchor for that community. You all are anchor organizations. Schools and colleges and universities are considered to be anchor institutions, but sometimes we're anchored to the two different things. And so we need to all kind of share in that respect.
So I'll just add to that real quick. So I feel, again, it begins with the adults in the organization. And one of the things that we're going to be holding, so save this date, I'll be posting it on October 8th. We're going to hold a racial forum with different leaders from our community. It's Penny Gregory from Wayne Township, Ebony Crow, who's one of my former graduate students. We're going to do a Zoom open to everybody. And we're encouraging districts too to really, to really begin to talk openly about white body supremacy, and to talk about how we can begin to address the rituals and the stories and the traditions of our students that they are bringing in, that is a part of who they are, and families. So I think it begins with conversation, and it begins, I agree with Sean, it's collaborative. It's looking at the whole, not only the whole child, but as Sean said, it's community. But sometimes it can begin at the ground level within, just a grade level. I mean, I've seen specific grade levels in different districts, really begin to open up this conversation about equity and to really address it. And this is kind of fun. One of the cool things that a couple of middle schools are doing right now is they're holding restorative practices. So the teachers and staff are in the inner circle, and the kids are watching and critiquing and giving them feedback. So they are talking about white body supremacy, black body and brown body trauma, and they're having this conversation, and the kids are giving input. The kids are the professors, like we say. The kids are, they're really giving input. So I love that, and that's something that I'm a big fan of. It makes you uncomfortable. I mean, that's not very comfortable, but it's going to take us to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, one thing I'll just add, Maddie.
Absolutely, that's fantastic. So
Sean was saying, I think, Maddie, he was adding to that, and we can't hear him.
Oh.
You're real faint.
What about now?
Not too bad. No.
Can you hear me now?
No.
turn it up.
Did it change at all? Okay. I don't know.
Sorry, Sean. So what we'll do, so I'm going to ask my final question, but we will have all of these Q&As posed in a transcript. And so whatever didn't get asked in this session, I will reach out to Sean and Lori, and we'll get the answers for everyone. And in the message I send next week, along with other materials, you will receive answers to your questions in a shorter form, if that works for everyone. Thumbs up if that's cool. For my final question, it's going to be a two-parter. It's the same question, but I also want to include Lupe and Taisha. So for the first part, I wanted to note that something that you said, Sean, was that strategies and policies from yesterday don't work anymore. Like we've tried to fit yesterday's solutions into today's problems, and it doesn't fit. And I know that a lot of our programs experienced that firsthand this year with COVID policies and everything going on. So what I wanted to know was if, what's like a top 3 strategy to stop using, like, you know, we've always done it this way now that we're in this constantly evolving space?
Good morning. Thank you first to the speakers. You did a fantastic job, and there's information there that we'll all be able to carry through into our programs and services. So thank you so much. In terms of your question, Maddie, that came up, I think really what we need to look at is what have we already learned? And so taking the information from this past experience and seeing how to move that into the next summer. We have to be realistic, of course, in terms of what can be done, but there has been a lot of information sharing already. And so the youth service field has talked to one another to understand what is happening now, gaining education, information, and sharing it in order to look at new practices or intensifying practices that we knew have been helpful and have been working, but looking at how to build around those practices to ensure that the youth are taken care of. And I'm sorry, I keep saying we, I keep going back and forth, and I may still do that for a year or so, but I just want to make sure that everyone understands that what we're going through now, it's just been exacerbated by so many different issues that we are all trying to address, but we're also in learning mode. And because of that, we have a lot of information at our fingertips, and information are coming from sessions like today. It's helpful in rethinking what needs to be done or incorporating this information into new strategies.
Thanks, Taisha. Lupe, can you speak to how the CICF is shifting priorities to meet the needs of our programs too, with all this going on?
Yeah, so first of all, good morning, and thank you, Dr. Huddleston and Dr. Desautels. I took so many notes, so we really appreciate your time. Yeah, I think CICF has really, after launching the new mission and, you know, making bold statements like we want to dismantle systematic racism, we have really shifted how we're doing things. And a lot of it, I would like to say, is centered on community. And so listening to what, you know, organizations need and being flexible. I think with your previous question, I think it's important to, you know that we are learning and it is hard. The time we're going through is hard, but this also gives us time, a space to be creative. And so I think CICF has done that. You know, earlier when COVID was, you know, first hit our community, you know, the Neighbor Relief Fund was started at the Central Indiana Community Foundation, and it was something that was completely new, but we just kind of went with it, and because the community needed it, right? And so I think for me and for a lot of us on the CICF team, it's been really amazing to kind of bittersweet, right? To see, it was sad to see that some programs weren't able to continue, but we also saw some individuals that really, or organizations that heard what the youth needed and they shifted. And so I think that sense of resiliency was there, and it was just cool to be a part of that and to just see what was happening on the ground. So we're also thankful to all the organizations that are here today. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks everyone so much for sticking through this panel, and for, of course, Dr. Desautels and Dr. Huddleston, you were fantastic. I'm going to have a lot of follow-up questions for you, and we'll be working together probably for the next week. For right now, I just want to let you know that we are going to have one more quick break, and I promise, our last session is very, very important for details on the application process, information that you need to know, that you won't necessarily, that you're gonna you're going to need to know first and foremost, and we will be super quick, I promise. And this last poll will help inform how we help accommodate you in the future as well. So 2-minute break again. Promise it'll just be 2 minutes. Promise we're going to be done really soon. Thank you again to our speakers, and I will see you soon after this poll. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you, everybody. I'm going to log off, Maddie. So thank you.
Thanks, Lori. Appreciate your time.
Thank you again.
Thank you. Sean, you're welcome to head on out too if you want to. This is just the details for grantees. Thank you. All right, everyone, we're going to give it 1 more minute for the poll. Thank you for the 115 people who have already submitted their responses. That's fantastic. I promise we will get you out of here on time. 1 more minute, and then we'll get kicked off with the last bit of this meeting, okay? All right, closing the poll. I'm gonna share the results really quickly. So it sounds like a lot of you would like more individual assistance, which we at McCoy are prepared to do and excited to help with. So without further ado, I believe that we have Beth with the City of Indianapolis at the Department of Metropolitan Development up first.
Awesome, thank you so much. So hi everyone, my name is Beth Neville and I am the Community Development Block Grant Manager for the City of Indianapolis. Community Development Block Grant is often a little bit of a mouthful, so you may have also heard just CDBG for short. So I'm also joined today by my colleague Jess Gillum, who's the CDBG coordinator. So we wanted to give you guys a little bit of an overview of CDBG. CDBG is a formula grant from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. It's provided to states and cities and is specifically focused on benefiting low and moderate income households and neighborhoods. The city uses a portion of our CDBG funds to invest in Indy Summer Youth Programs, and we are specifically focusing on youth employment programs. So because CDBG is a federal funding source, it comes with a few additional regulations. So first of all, it's contingent on the approval of the 2021 federal budget. We actually had a couple of years ago, if you remember, the government was shut down for a historic month. And so we actually had all of our funding delayed because of that. So it is often not an issue, but when it is an issue, it's a real issue. So it's also contingent on approval from the City County Council. A few other things, 51% of clients served must be at or below 80% of the area median income. So for example, a family of four can make up to about $65,000. The remaining 49% of clients can be at any income level. We can also only invest in new or expanding programs. The definition of expanding programs has a bit of flexibility in the federal regulations. So if you have specific questions, please feel free to email me. We also can only fund programs inside of Marion County, and we cannot fund projects that are focused, well, I guess are headquartered in Beech Grove, Lawrence, Southport, or Speedway, so those excluded communities. Payments are always on a reimbursement basis and can only be used for certain eligible costs. Most often that's staff salaries and wages. Typically we have a tough time with the regulations funding equipment or supplies, so just something to keep in mind. Every participant in a CDBG funded program has to fill out a city provided client profile form that includes specific demographic information and then a self-certification of income. We have to report all of that to HUD on the back end. So it's a really important piece of any CDBG funded programs. And then finally, the minimum request for CDBG funds is $10,000. And again, we're really only focusing on youth employment. So I think that just about covers it. So please feel free to reach out and email me with any questions. I can dump my email address in the chat if that'd be helpful. And with that, I will turn it back over to Maddie.
Awesome. Thanks, Beth. I appreciate you. If you can share your contact information just in case anyone has any questions, that would be fantastic. I will also be sharing more details next week in the email that I have previously mentioned, but we're going to go ahead and move on. Patty Villers, are you ready for our Lilly Endowment conversation?
I am. Welcome. Good morning to everyone. It was really nice to see a lot of familiar faces at the start of the webinar and see some of your names. As many of you know, I am a program director at Lilly Endowment in the Education Division, and I'm here to talk about the capital grant process. As in previous years, the endowment expects to award 25 to 30 capital grants of up to $30,000 in 2021. So who's eligible? Indy Summer Youth Program grantees are eligible to apply for both program operations and capital project and equipment grants. An ISPY applicant must meet the following criteria to qualify for a capital project and equipment grant. Your organization must have received an ISYP, or in the old days, a Summer Youth Program Fund, program grant in 2 out of the last 3 years. So that would be 2018, 2019, and or 2020. You must apply and receive a program grant for the summer of 2021, and you must have submitted all previous summer youth program and capital project grants in a timely manner. Some of your acceptable projects may include, but aren't limited to, one or more of the following: playground or safety equipment, computer equipment, vans, wiring for internet access, books, musical instruments, minor building and grounds improvements such as room or kitchen renovations, security fences for cooling equipment, that type of thing. Please do not include expenses for consumable items such as copy paper or toner, or in the case of a vehicle, extended maintenance warranties, insurance, or fuel expenses. Vehicle registration and documentation fees are allowed. With respect to proposals for vehicle purchases, such as a van, bus, or a minibus, please describe briefly your process in deciding to purchase rather than lease or rent a vehicle, taking into account other expenses such as long-term maintenance, insurance, and other cost comparisons. Please take into account how often the vehicle will be used other than during your summer program. You may find it's more cost efficient over the long term for your organization to rent or lease a vehicle rather than spend $30,000 or more and incur the ongoing added expense for your vehicle upkeep. Please specify how you will comply with state and federal guidelines regarding the vehicle size, passenger safety, and driver training and certification. If you decide that a lease is the most cost-effective way for your organization to go forward, do not apply for capital grant funding to support the lease. Also, with respect to vehicle purchases, please note that capital grant funds are not to be used for insurance, maintenance agreements, or fuel expenses. So don't include those items as part of your budget. As far as the application process, we're progressive and we're online again instead of the old paper way. Online application will again be through Lilly Endowment. Application materials are available on the Indy Summer Youth Program website via the For Grantees link. The URL is fairly lengthy, so I will not go into that, but it is on the website. Qualified organizations interested in a capital project and equipment grant should complete the online cover sheet, application, and budget, along with any attachments showing estimates from contractors, online vendors, or internet pricing. You'll need to scan those documents and estimates and attach them as separate documents as part of your online submission. The guidelines in the application form will be available online at the ISYP website starting on Monday, September 7th. You can complete the application on your computer, but remember to print out your application, save it, and then you can use your paper copy to keep in your files for your records. These submissions, and again, that would be the cover sheet, the capital grant project narrative, and answers to all of the questions, scanned copies of vendor estimates, internet pricing, and so forth, must be received at the Lilly Endowment website address by 12 noon on Monday, October 26th. And that website will be ispcapital@lei.org, but that will also be available on the website. And I want to make sure that you understand that the capital grant applications, you apply directly to Lilly Endowment. Do not send that form to CICF. So if you're submitting both, you'll submit a program application to CICF and your capital grant application will come directly to Lilly Endowment. You'll also note in the guidelines that there's a section pertaining to United Way legacy organizations. So if your organizations is one of those 82 legacy organizations, the endowment requests that you please discuss your capital grant need with Gary Woodworth at the United Way. His phone number will be part of the guidelines. And he can help you see if you would qualify for access to the United Way's Facilities Maintenance Fund. If after speaking with Gary, you still want to submit an application for a capital grant through Lilly Endowment, please describe the outcome of your discussion with Gary. So for example, major heating and cooling repairs, replacement of a swimming pool filter system, replacement of a damaged playground fence. Those are the kinds of things you might check with Gary about. Your organization would have to self-fund 25% of the estimated repair request, but Gary can explain the particulars of that process to you. If you're planning to apply for a grant for a vehicle purchase, you don't need to call Gary. You would just go ahead and submit your capital grant application to the endowment. As far as your budget reminders, please provide a total project budget on your budget form, copies of the written estimates and your proposed purchase orders from third parties, vendors, internet pricing, and so forth should be scanned and attached separately to your email submission. When contacting vendors, please make sure they understand that the final grant decisions will not be announced until early February. As far as permits, it's helpful to research in advance if you're going to have a capital project that might require a city or a state permit for your project, such as a sidewalk, fence, other outdoor construction. If your organization is awarded a capital grant, you can then start your permit process a few weeks before the checks go out so as not to delay the start of your project. Please check your numbers on the budget page and attach scanned copies of all your relevant invoices and estimates. Compare the amounts that you put on your budget with your attachments so those things match up, and to make sure that you haven't omitted any items and that you have inserted the correct quantities and dollar amounts as reflected on the attachments before you hit that send button. And we look forward to working with you on your projects for summer of 2021. And thanks for your time with us today.
Thanks, Patty. That was a lot of information. So if anyone has any questions, we will of course feature some more details on that. Brick and mortar is a little more complicated, as Patty explained. So we'll be ready to go for you next week with a summary and links that Patty has mentioned here. If we can go ahead and move forward, last but not least before me is Hector. If you can share with us, Hector's new to CICF, so welcome, Hector. And he has hit the ground running with all of his great work already. So,
hi everyone, how are you guys doing today? I hope you're doing well. Can you all hear me? We're good? Okay, I was having troubles with my computer yesterday. So real quick, my name is Hector Morales. I just started working at CICF. Prior to that, I was working at a law firm. Basically, what I'm going to be helping you guys out with is with the 2021 Indy Summer Youth Program application. Basically, any tech issues that you guys have, any information that you need, you can just email me. I'm going to send the information to below in the chat if you guys need that. But yeah, I think that's really about it.
sorry everyone. Of course, I kicked myself out at the last minute because that's who I am as a person. So, but I just wanted to close really quickly to say you're going to see my name and my face a lot more frequently and in probably hopefully cool ways. McCoy is working, I'm the communications director for McCoy first and foremost. And we are working on expanding all of our services to help assist every single Indy Summer Youth Programs recipient, because that's what we heard from you, that's what you need. And so just to let you know, the name change was so that we could reach other people, because so the Lilly Endowment, Central Indiana Community Foundation, Borshoff, and McCoy have been working really hard to make sure that we showcase the phenomenal work that you're doing in our community. And so we wanted to reach more families and youth with the opportunities that you provide. So that's going to take shape in a new portal. It's already taken shape in a new public facing website at indysummeryouth.org. And that is so that we can reach more parents and more youth who need opportunities for things like being a counselor in training, or even as simple as just signing up and registering for a summer camp or an after school program. You all know now more than ever during COVID, kids need connection, and we heard that from all of our speakers, and we know that because we've been working with the kids all summer. So we want to help you continue that goal. That some of the things that we're going to provide, we have a new grantee portal that I will be sharing in the email next week along with all of the recordings and all the materials that you saw here today. But I will also be sharing opportunities to have one-on-one marketing assistance with me and one-on-one communications. We also just launched a new texting program. So if you get with me on outreach for your parents or for coordinating efforts with other programs, I really want to hear from you. Becky Reich is on the phone. She is my colleague and my cohort on almost all of this stuff. So we're here to serve you. That's what our role is. So if you have any questions leading up to your application process, Patty, Taisha, Lupe, Hector are fantastic for what they're looking for. And if you need assistance for the extra parts or the extra implementation, we're here to help. Becky is our training director. We have a lot of upcoming trainings. She put some of them in the chat, as well as John. John Brandon is probably still on. I hope he's our CEO, but we are here to help. And so in the email that you're going to receive, it will have links to all of the upcoming training sessions, and we will modify our trainings to reflect what we heard from you in the polls. Two important ones coming up. We have eCPR from September 21st through the 25th. Becky, please correct me if I'm wrong. If you can put the link in the thing. And yes, interrupting racism for youth is a huge one, and it's incredibly impactful. It's all online. So we've updated our resources to make sure that it was accessible for everyone. And Becky is putting all of those links in our chat right now. And we, again, so I'm going to stick around. I'm going to stay online, keep this open. If anyone has any questions for me or anything that I can help with, I'm going to stay open. But for now, thank you so much for sticking with us today, this morning. It was a long haul, and I appreciate you all staying through. I'll be in contact soon.
Hello.
Hi, Simone. How are you?
Good. How are you? I just noticed well, nice to see your face. I just noticed that the registration for the diversity is $50. Is that also for, I didn't read all of it. Is that for existing partners as well?
So there's a discount, I believe, for SYPF, but Becky, if you can hop
Okay.
on.
Yeah, you just posted that. Okay, that's why
Yeah, so just a quick explanation. There are occasionally trainings that are very, very, very expensive that basically, if they're limited seating, then we charge a little bit just to make sure that we don't end up with empty chairs. That's typically a $350 training per person. So to host one is a significant expense, but basically if you enter in SYPF, you will get it for $40 for the 2-day training. Again, that's really just to make sure that our very limited number of spots are used, so that at the end of the day, we're accountable to the dollars we're spending from funders, and making sure that 100% attendance is met at many of these as possible.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Does anyone else have any other questions?
Hi, this is LaShawna Triplett with the MLT Outreach Center. Is there a difference with the capital grant and the SYPF grant?
Yeah, so you can receive both, but they're separate applications. So the application for SYPF will technically, ISYP. I made the website and I still can't get the acronym right. So that will go through CICF's process, but the one that Patty was talking about for the brick and mortar will go through LEI. And so in the email that I send next week, you'll have links to both.
And that when it will give us details, when it opens up tomorrow, it'll give us details of the criteria for the brick and mortar?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
No problem.
Hi, this is Erica Christie from the Joseph Maley Foundation.
Hi, Erica.
Hi. We are we have never applied for the Summer Youth Program Fund before, and we are interested this year. And so I was wondering if you could share more about the general application process.
Sure. So unfortunately, I don't, Hector is super new. Hector, do you have a chance to, are you still on? Can you kind of speak to the process, or do you want me to wing it?
No, you're good. And the light just came up. So real quick, it's just basically make an account in our portal at the CICF. You're gonna need to have a primary person to log into the account. That primary person is gonna be also the person that is gonna be in charge of filling out the application. After the primary person fills out the account information, the system is going to ask you for the organization's information. So basically, there's two informations that you're going to fill out: the primary account holder and the organization account. After that, it's going to take you to the actual portal where you can apply for the application. And it's going to ask you for other information in there. The deadline, I put the deadline in there is October 26th, I believe I put in there. Let me see. We have deadline as October 26th. Please do not wait till last minute because sometimes we do have a ton of people coming in and we cannot help everyone. So if you could have it ready like the day before, and if you have minor questions, you can always email me regarding any other questions. The application actually launches tomorrow at 8 a.m. if you guys had a question about that too. But yeah, that's basically all the information, I guess. Do you guys have any other questions regarding the application?
For the capital, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Dick. Go ahead.
For the capital, the brick and mortar with Lily, is that filled out through the Lily portal, or will that also go through the CICF portal?
That's specifically through LEI. So we'll have the separate links available next week. And we'll make sure that they're distinguished because it is a little bit confusing.
Thank you.
Hector mentioned that the launch is tomorrow. Is that at cicf.org, or should we go to his email? How does that work?
Okay, no, that's a really good question. We actually have a portal that you guys have access to. Maddie will actually send you the link with all the information, but if you still have any questions about that, you can always feel free to email me.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Gloria Ara from Direct Employers Institute. I do have a question. Is the capital grant due on the same day as the ISYP, which is October 26th?
Yes. Actually, they usually give you about a month extension, but because of circumstances this year, I think that they're going to do it the following week. But I will make sure that those details are in the email that I send you. So if you can drop your email address in our, Gloria, I actually recently added you to our listserv, so I know that you'll get it. But if you're not sure, if you are on our listserv, please drop your email if you're concerned about the timing for the difference between brick and mortar and SYP stuff. That way I can make sure that I reach you.
Sounds good. I'll add my email and my coworker Kate's email as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Hector. This is Malachi Walker with Young Men Incorporated. And my question is I don't know if we're having trouble with the portal, but we're trying to find out how to bring up the application from 2019 that we submitted.
Okay. I'm gonna have to check on that because I don't think we can pull at this moment previous applications. But let me check on that, and if you email me just to follow up on that, and if I'll give you an answer by tomorrow.
Absolutely, we'll do that. All right, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions from anyone?
I do have a question. This is Jennifer with Fellowship of Christian Athletes. In looking at the email that we received today, and then pulling up the attachment, it shows, it appears that the deadline is September 30th on that information.
Nope. So September 30th, and did it come in today? So that was September 30th is the deadline for reports for the current recipients, not future recipients.
Okay, got it. Okay, got it. That may be where I'm seeing the disconnect. Okay, super. Reports and then October.
Maddie,
okay.
This is Jeanette Moody.
Hey, Jeanette.
This is Jeanette Moody, and I had a question about the capital grants. She was going pretty quickly, but my understanding is that you are not eligible to apply unless you have received a summer youth grant previously. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right, so that automatically, if you have not received a grant in 2018 or 19, you're ineligible to apply for this.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, no. If you, I'm sorry. If you have not received one in the last 2 years, an ISYP grant,
you're not eligible to apply.
You're not eligible if you have not received one in the last 2 years.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? We've got 82 people. You ready to be done for today? Because I am. But if you have more questions, I'm sticking around.
Thank you.
Thanks, Beatrice. Good to see you.
Maddie, this is Luis Palacio from Health and Science Innovations. This is a question that I don't know if this is the place to ask or not, but since there's a lot of funders when you apply to the the ISYP, is there a way to know what are they wanting to fund?
I'm sorry, can you repeat it?
Is there a way to know what kind of activities or programs they're more inclined to fund, or what is their sort of passion for funding?
Yeah. So that's kind of why we have the polls during the session, is to gauge, because they're really open to anything. That, like, the funders' goals are to support any organization that is helping youth grow up well. And so whatever that looks like, I know that STEM and tech is very popular right now. But those polls were specifically to see what they needed. Because this is such a weird time with COVID, I think they're realigning goals as well. But we have 11 funders, and I know that the primary ones, LEI and CICF, are really just here to support any organization that is helping youth grow up well.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Got time? Whatever you need to talk about. If you need support for marketing, again, connect with me, please. We had an opportunity for an offer for technical support as well, so we'll be robusting that. If you need a website designer or anything, we're really honestly here to help. So if you have questions regarding that or upcoming trainings, so the polls also informed who we're inviting to train people.
Maddie, did I just hear you say assistance with website designing?
You did.
And that's at McCoy?
It's at McCoy.
Okay. I'll be in touch.
Okay, perfect. I will be happy to have you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I've been scratching my head with that. And I don't have much hair to continue scratching.
I've got enough to spare, and also I love teaching of how to develop websites that are easy to use and something that's going to be sustainable for your program. So that's kind of what we're developing. And so it's something that you will be able to own after we go through all the steps. Does that work?
Sure. How much is the fee for that?
Free.
Wow. Okay.
The fee is come hang out with me with a mask on and I'll teach you how to do it.
Done. Okay. You see me soon.
Perfect.
Maddie, sorry y'all. I don't know if you can see me. Hi.
Hi,
Maddie, I had a question about the SYPF capital and SYPF program and whether they differ at all in terms of the focus geography. I thought that they were the same, but we had some question as to whether the SYPF capital had a larger geographic range around the Indianapolis area and donut counties, or if they were both really focused more on the immediate Indy area, Marion County kind of area.
So I know that they prioritize Marion County, but
Okay.
Becky, are you still on? Becky's been around a lot longer than I have for this. I don't know if she can speak to that, but I know that the priority is Marion County.
Yeah, the focus is Marion County for these particular funds.
Great.
I love your background. That's so snappy.
Thank you. We got these early on. They've kept the calls fun. We have a bunch of them. I wish I was hiking like these girls.
That's so fun. I tried to make a background for this meeting and then like my hair got super weird and tangled into, it was not cute. So.
Yeah, that happens to me too.
Does anyone else have any other questions? We've got 59 more people on. This is a long haul. See who can stay the longest. This is a fun game. All right, well, if no one has any other questions, Becky, do you want to make an announcement that I failed to recognize or just didn't say in my spiel?
No, I think you hit it all. A lot of it will come from follow-up, and a lot of these folks have been around probably longer than I have doing some of this work with all the names I'm seeing. So I just look forward to seeing everybody back in person again. I miss my people. I miss them. So I am just ready for when we can get back, and even really just seeing faces on Zoom and stuff. I'm gonna let y'all know, you come to training, you aren't gonna be able to like opt out of the video part. We're gonna make you pop in. So wash your hair, take a shower, be dressed up from the top up. I've full transparency. I have pajama pants on right now, but hey, nobody told you, nobody knows. So I just am ready.
I'm in the office.
Right. I'm just ready to see y'all. Oh, hi Charnay. Oh, y'all, see, I miss y'all. All right, that's enough of that before I get all whatever. I'll see y'all soon. You'll get sick of me and by winter.
All right, everyone. So if we have no more questions, you all have our email addresses. I'm going to send out a follow-up email with all the content from today out next week. It'll probably be next Thursday, so that gives me enough time to splice out breaks of our video. But otherwise, I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was fantastic. Bye, everyone.